This is Craig and Andrew, two Ranger qualified Army officers with MBAs, here to help you improve your business through leadership.
Each week, we'll deliver easy lessons from the battlefield to the boardroom on how to improve team performance. If you're a leader or want to be, this is the place for you.
Welcome to the cohort.
Disclaimer: the views in this podcast are those of the authors alone and do not represent the views of the Department of Defense or the U.S. Army.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Command Post Cohort.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back.
I think today Andrew's got a story for us we're going to start with and talk about leadership and from what little I've heard so far, I think it's a difficult situation. We've got some cross-functional challenges and maybe even a touch of conflict in there.
Yeah. It's a good story. I think we'll all learn something from it, hopefully. Cross-functional leadership, cross-functional friction, perhaps, but a good story. Before we start, I do want to mention, if you go to Command Post Cohort website, you can find links to different consulting aspects we have. So take a look there if you're interested. I think we can bring this kind of story to you guys. Okay, so this story takes place in Afghanistan, and I think it was probably 2013, and we were in eastern Afghanistan, and it was the time of kind of the COP closures. We were starting to consolidate bases on Afghanistan, make everything smaller, and starting to get people out. So we had a lot of equipment over there, and a lot of people, and a lot of different little places. So we had to bring those back and start flying them back to the United States. So this is a story about that. Now, the base that I lived on was pretty big. My company had an airfield and was one of the main bases where we were. But our sister company was not too far away, but they had a base that was just big enough for their company. And then beyond that, just a little bit further, they had a platoon outpost that was just the size of one platoon. So really not much there at all.
Yeah.
And we're going to close down that one platoon outpost. So to do that, it takes a lot of effort, right? Because you have to imagine all the life support assets that are there to support that platoon, right? They had an ammunition storage, they had a fuel blivet, right, which is a big bag of fuel essentially for the limited vehicles and the generators they had there. They had, their containerized kitchen, so they could eat. We do have to feed them. So they had some things. They had a few minor structures there and comms equipment stuff we had to bring back. Well, so the way we were going to do that was to drive up there and put it all on trucks and bring it back. Some of it was flown out, but that was going to be the primary way that my battalion did. I was going to be the ground force commander of this operation. Like, doing this was going to be quite a big operation, right? So I had a lot of help from the battalion in terms of scheduling and all that, because we were the big base that I lived on was kind of okay. The sister company where they lived was not really that far away, probably 5 or 6 kilometers away, but it's all through enemy territory. And then beyond that was another 5 or so kilometers further into enemy territory.
Yeah.
It was going to be a big operation.
Yeah. And it sounds like the risk was increasing. Every time you got further away, the risk was a little bit greater from enemy threat.
Yeah. The further out you got, the more danger you accepted. So we had Apache coverage laid on for the operation, and the sister company was going to do patrols around to kind of prevent any enemy attacks while we were doing it. And these roads were constantly laid with IED. So what my company was going to be responsible for was escorting trucks and some engineers, providing security for them all the way out to the small platoon-sized outpost and back, so we could get rid of it. So the way we were going to do that was we were all going to move to and stage at the sister company's base first, which is called Baraki Barak, or BBK for short. And then we were going to do turns from there out to EBK, which was the platoon-sized outpost. I can't remember what EBK stands for, but it was a platoon-sized outpost. So we do turns out there and come back. So we had, in order to mitigate that risk, we had the Apaches, we had the dismounted patrols And we would do it, of course, at night because we do everything at night. So there's kind of a lot going on. And I said I would be the ground force commander, so I'd be responsible for everything going on the ground, the point of contact, the leader on the ground, right? Now I had, my platoons work with me. I had two platoons because we're going to do in kind of two shifts, two turns each, right? I would supervise one with one of my platoons, the engineers and some trucks, and then my first sergeant would take the other one, my other platoon, another load of engineers, another load of trucks, and then we also had a platoon that was on the quick reaction force out at the big base, which wasn't too far away. So that in case we did get in some bad trouble, we could call them and they'd connect seamlessly with us and be able to engage the enemy. So that's kind of the groundwork, right? Now, my company, to be clear, was not engineers. We were not truck drivers. We were a maneuver element. We were cavalry scouts, right? So our job was to find bad guys and make sure they posed a threat no longer to the United States. And that is not what the engineers do. Okay. So the engineers in this particular role were responsible for finding and getting rid of IEDs along the route, as well as what we call kind of retrograding some of the different pieces of the outpost of EBK. They would help kind of break it down to get it back. That's not our specialty, that was theirs. So it's two different organizations, two different functions, right? So first, we had to move from our base to the sister base, right, to BBK, which was kind of a big deal in of itself because, of course, it was going to be all at night so that we could try and mask our movement as much as possible to the enemy. Well, you can imagine that that's quite a few people, quite a lot of large vehicles because we had, two of my platoons, my own vehicles, so that's like 10 vehicles there, and then all the engineer vehicles, which they had a platoon. So then we had to get out to the base. Well, they had a motor pool there where we could all park. It was going to be really tight because there's so many of us. We were able to get there and kind of line up and be ready to go. Now, prior to that, prior to moving out there, we had a lot of rehearsals, right? Like me and my platoons and these engineers, we worked a lot together in preparing for this. We talked through the plan. We made sure we were all in agreement with it. We did rehearsals, right? So we got out in an open area and drew a little what they call a terrain model. So we lined up engineer tape on the ground, make a sandbox out of it. So we had rehearsed the plan. We talked about how we were going to get there. As soon as we get to the sister base, we would line up the motor pools like this, but you get gas first because that's what you do so that in case you do have to roll out unexpectedly, you're ready to go. So when we got there, we would get gas, then we'd park, and then we'd get ready. And this is the order we're going to roll out the next night, that kind of thing. And as I said, we would take two turns each night with different elements. And then we talked about what would happen if we did make enemy contact on the route, like the enemy started shooting at us, how we would take care of that. And now, like I said, my company, that's what we did. We took care of the enemy. The engineers did not do that. They were supposed to take care of the IEDs, right? Well, they still had big guns in their trucks because that they still had gun trucks. You still have to protect yourself. So when I was talking in preparation for this, in the rehearsals for this, I was talking to the engineers and their gunners, and I said, okay, so let's talk about this. If we get into enemy contact, my soldiers will go out and start engaging the enemy. What are your gunners going to do? And the gunners, they, like great Americans, wanted to help and engage the enemy as well. Fantastic. But the problem is big guns are dangerous, right? And machine guns in particular, they don't shoot like a laser,
Yeah.
right? They shoot more like a cone. And the further you get out and the more high powered the machine gun, the bigger the cone is. And if you don't know that, and if you're not very well trained in that, then you could very easily hurt friendly forces, especially if you don't know where they are because there's trees and ditches and buildings and things like that. So we had to talk them through. Okay, so if my guys are out there in the wood line shooting at the enemy, what are your gunners going to do? And they're like, well, we're gonna be really accurate when we shoot at the bad guys. I was like, I'm sorry, no, you can't do that because these big guns have big concerns. And that was not necessarily their fault, right? They'd probably never trained on that because that wasn't their function, right? That was
Yeah.
our function.
And just so maybe to to help it expand on that is when maneuver units that do train that with
Mhm.
machine guns, that there is an extensive amount of time and repetition that goes into that, to where inside of your own unit have a
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, like I said, if you hadn't trained on that, if you didn't really know that that wasn't your specialty, then you probably didn't know that, right? So
yeah.
we talked through that. And we talked through how we would get into the motor pool at the sister base, and then we talked through, walk through when we took the turns, how we would drive out to EBK, the platoon-sized element, and drive around the back of the base, drive through the base to help load up all the trucks and disassemble the things we needed to carry back, and then load up on the fuel because, like I said, we had to retrograde all that fuel blivet they had. So we'd load up on that fuel to help make it lighter, and then kind of pull through the base in a big line to make it easier to get back on the road to return. So we get ready at our big base, right? And we're all lined up, and it's dark, and it's go time. So we drive out there really without any problem out to BBK. And the Army, we call it priorities of work, and that is when you get to your base, right, or where you're going to stop, there are things you do before you start taking care of yourself. Really, is the best way I can come up with to describe it. Uh, in the cavalry terms, we call it the saber, the saddle, the self. You take care of your saber, you take care of your saddle, then you can take care of yourself. So what that means in this case is you fuel up your trucks, make sure your guns have all the ammo they can carry, make sure everything's ready to go before you get out your own sleeping bag and you start to sleep. So we got there and we pulled in the motor pool of BBK, the sister company. And we got in the motor pool. Again, it was kind of tight because these are really big, really heavy vehicles, kind of in a tight space. So that in itself is very risky because, unfortunately, frequently a lot of soldiers are run over because they're not doing things safely and properly in tight spaces like this when it comes to these big, heavy vehicles. So we get there and the priorities are working. Fuel up, get gas, get bullets, make sure everything's ready to go. Then you can rack out. So we get there, and before I'm even in the motor pool, um, and out of my own vehicle, they are all pulling out their sleeping bags and sleeping in and around on top of these big, giant, heavy vehicles with very sharp edges, which is a problem again because number one, it's very dangerous without it's like designated sleeping areas and everybody knowing where everybody's sleeping. It can be very dangerous, and there's no way that they all had time to get fuel. So I had to, find the guy that was in charge of that element and say, "Hey, listen, did y'all get fuel?" Well, no, we'll get it before we move out. No, because there's a chance we might have to roll out sooner because the enemy gets a vote, right? So I need you to get fuel. Also, like the way you guys are sleeping, it's very dangerous. I don't want anybody to get hurt. I don't have a casualty before we even start because somebody got run over because they were sleeping underneath the vehicle. So I need you to get your element together, get some gas, make sure everybody's safe, and then designate some sleeping areas here because this is not safe. So they didn't like me saying that, but they did it, right? So they all got up safely and they got fuel and they were getting ready to go. Then they designated sleeping areas and were able to sleep. And then the next night we would start the operation really. So that it took a lot of concentrated effort, right? Because this is somebody that didn't do what we do, but I didn't really have any control over them. However, I was the ground force commander, so did have authority, but again, I wasn't really in charge of them. This is kind of a cross-functional kind of thing. And so it was like constant communication, make sure that they understood what I meant when I said it, because not always is message sent, message received, right? Because just because I said something some way doesn't mean the receiver understood it in that same way. So it got to the next night and we were getting ready to move out. Like I said, we had Apache coverage overhead, so the big heavy helicopters, and then we had people, other soldiers that were out patrolling on foot to kind of prevent any ambushes that way. And of course, it was all in the night, all in the dark. So the engineers would roll out first, in the order of march. They would go out first so that they would detect any IEDs and dispose of them properly, safely on the route, to allow the rest of the element, my security element and the trucks, to do it safely. So we drove out there, made it safely, really without incident, because of all the different assets we had going on. The idea was that, again, we'd come around the back entrance of it, pull through, so we could stop inside the little base there, most of us that we could, load some things up on the trucks. Everybody could get fuel from that fuel blivet, and then we could pull out the front gate and kind of continue on around to make things easier in terms of getting out. Because there's only one road between the EBK and BBK. In the dark night, here we go. And this was, it was only like 5 kilometers, but it might as well have been 50. Because it was in enemy territory. So everybody was on high alert the whole time. So we start to get to the base, right? And you can imagine if 10, 15 vehicles are lined up, that's a pretty long distance, really. We were spread out probably half a mile. So the front end, the engineers, they got to the front gate of this base first, right? And the plan was to go around the back gate and, again, pull through. Well, they got to the front gate and they turned around at the front gate. Like, each individual vehicle turned around right where they were at the front gate. So now you have what's supposed to be the lead element all turned around backwards, and the very front truck is now the very last truck, and they're facing all the rest of us because we still had to come through. Again, I guess message sent was not message received. I was like, hey, what's going on? We're supposed to pull around the back. Well, this will make things faster. Well, that's not the plan. We have to retrograde some of this fuel. We have to retrograde some of these vehicles, and to make some of the stuff that's inside, and to make the returning to the base easier, we all need to pull through the base, so that to get back on the one road, to make it all easier. So again, they did not like that, because then they had to turn around all their vehicles again, and they had to back up, and they had to get to the road that went around the backside of the base. So did all of that, right? And again, I guess message sent wasn't message received, right? And you can imagine, like, in the dark night, I'd been up so long, practiced all this, rehearsed all this. We started pulling through the base, and one of the leaders of that engineer unit came up and knocked on my truck, and was like, hey, we're ready to go. It's like, okay, did y'all get fuel? And he said, no. I said, okay, well, we've talked about this. Like, we have to retrograde this fuel. I need you to get fuel. I was like, but we don't need fuel. It's not that far. We don't need fuel. It would take much longer to go back and get fuel now. Let's just go. So this is like the cross-functional friction, right? This is why cross-functional leadership is something that we all need to work on and learn, right? Because they're not trained on the same things we're trained on. Message sent may not be message received. So it takes like constant effort to communicate properly and to work through these issues, because that's why it's cross-functional. It's 2 different functionalities.
Yeah.
So I said, go get fuel. They didn't understand that the priority was to get rid of all this stuff, right? Or to move it back to bigger bases. So he was sitting there and opened the door to my truck. These trucks are so big. I was like looking down at him. I was like, do we have to go get fuel? Yes, we have to, because we have to retrograde all this fuel. I said, okay. So then he shut the door, and he got his trucks all got fuel. And they loaded it back up in their trucks. And then he called me over the radio when they were ready to go. And we'd taken care of all that stuff. So then we started pulling back out, kind of back out on the road back to BBK to start, to allow the other element to move to the base. That was the first night, and it was quite a lot of fun. Luckily, the rest of the operation went pretty smoothly, and really didn't have any enemy contact, because we had the people out patrolling around the ground, and we had the helicopters overhead, and we'd put a lot of effort into planning and trying to mitigate that kind of stuff. So there's actually you can imagine by the second night, we were all pretty exhausted, because the operations took all night long. And then again, you had to take care of everything else before you got to rest yourself. And this is a base that we didn't stay at. So we had to sleep in these designated areas that, by no means were hotel safe patches on the ground, more or less. I was able to find in one of the buildings a little cot to sleep on. There's actually a good story about an Auburn grad that I met while I was there. Maybe for a different podcast. But so the rest of the operation went pretty well, and we continued to work with everybody that was involved, the truckers, the engineers, the pilots, the sister company, all to kind of bring all this stuff back. And it ended up working out pretty well, and we were able to get accomplished what we wanted to kind of after all that effort. And like I said, that's why cross-functional leadership is something that has to be taught and tried and worked on continuously, because message sent may not be a message received, and you've got to work together, right? That's why there's different functionalities. They did not do what I did not do what they did, but we needed each other. We had to work together to get this thing done, and it's constant communication and working with each other. But ultimately, we got it done without any body getting hurt, luckily, and we're able to kind of close down that base. So
Yeah.
all in all, it's a pretty good operation. Just lots of effort.
Yeah. Yeah. It sounds like communication was a really, key piece of that throughout that story of, how do you help mitigate those challenges with cross-functional teams? Because, you may be working off different understanding levels, maybe different levels of training or different levels of even just terminology, and sometimes I've found that where people using different terminology across the teams. And so making sure that communication is well founded assists with that.
Yeah. But I mean, like I said, there was that Auburn grad that I met while I was there. It's a really good story. It's a heartwarming story. Maybe we can make a different podcast out of that.
Yeah, we'll have to revisit that.
Well, Craig, thanks for letting me share that this morning. I think that'll wrap us up for today. Thanks for listening, everybody.
We appreciate y'all.
Stay tuned in, and we'll see you again soon.
Yeah, have a good one.
As always, take these lessons, use them, and spread them. Everyone is welcome in the cohort.
Be sure to like, follow, and subscribe for more, and drop us a line at commandpostcohort.com to request a specific topic.
We'll see you next time on the cohort.